Good morning. Welcome to our webinar today, Business Facility Disaster Planning for Small Business. My name is Jairo Batista. I will be your organizer for today's webinar. For those of you who are new to the SBDC program, the Small Business Development Center Network was established in 1976 by the Small Business Administration to provide technical assistance to small businesses. The Florida Small Business Network is a part of a nationwide network of small business development centers that covers nearly 1,000 local centers across 50 states and U.S. territories. Our network is funded by the U.S. Small Business Administration, the state of Florida, and other private and local partners. We are state designated as Florida's principal provider of business assistance and are nationally accredited. Our SBDC state of the state of Florida is divided into 9 SBDC regions. The Central Florida region is headquartered in Orlando, Florida, and is hosted by the University of Central Florida. Our region includes Orange, Seminole, Osceola, Lake, Sumter, Volusia, Brevard, and Flagler counties. Our services include no-cost consulting from expert consultants and all of our confidential and one-on-one consultations. We also provide no-cost market research. Thanks to our connection with the Florida SBDC Network and the University of Central Florida, we have access to a wide array of different databases. So instead of going out and purchasing different reports, come talk to us and we can help you as far as your market research needs. We also provide special programs for second stage businesses. So for example, if you're at a stage where you're looking to grow your business and you're looking, let's say, into government contracting, or you're looking into exporting, we have programs for you to help set you up and get you on the right foot. And lastly, we provide business training seminars and webinars like these. Just a few housekeeping tips. You can find copies of today's presentation in the handout section of the GoToWebinar platform. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the questions chat box, and we'll address the questions at the end of the webinar. Lastly, later today, you will receive a webinar evaluation via email. It is greatly important. We greatly appreciate if you could fill that out. Those survey evaluations are very important to us as we determine what programs we can repeat in the future and what some of the needs are of small businesses. Now, without further delay, I'd like to turn it over to our presenter today, Teresa Davis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa Davis. I was born and raised in Florida, so disaster planning has been the way I was raised and is nothing new to me. Just a little bit of background. I was fortunate enough to be in Broward County when Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992. While we were affected with hurricane force winds, it's nothing compared to the disaster that Dade County experienced. It's one of those events that did make a very large impact on me at a young age. I've also worked for the Florida SBDC, so sorry about that. I also worked for the Florida SBDC at UCF for the past 13 years. And last year I was given the opportunity to take a course that certified my interest in disaster planning. And I am certified as an associate business continuity professional. On a more personal note, I do tell really awful dad jokes, so I will refrain from doing so in this presentation because we only have an hour and we have a lot to cover. I also want to give us some time at the very end to answer any of your questions. While this presentation will probably not give you all of the skills you'll need to create your full business continuity plan, it should help you better prepare for a disaster. So this is what we will be going over today. The steps you take today can prepare you and your business for a disaster that could happen tomorrow. We're going to go over the 5 whys: where, when, what, why, and who of disasters, 4 phases of business preparedness, and the very last slide after the Q&A, after my contact information, there are links to go to these links will have resources for your business. While I've only added 1 handout to this presentation today, it is the PDF version of this presentation. Those links continue to be updated with the latest resources to make planning and prepping as efficient and as easy as possible. So let's start addressing the when and the where together. Disasters happen regardless of where you live and cannot be scheduled like an appointment, but you can plan on how to respond to them. This is just a very short list of federal government disasters where they've stepped in to assist with since 1992. My first big memory of a disaster was Hurricane Andrew. So these are just a few of the things that they've helped with. Now, beyond what they help with, I want to talk to you guys about some things that are local. The images of the fire trucks on this screen and the ambulance that was taken on a main street thoroughfare of a shopping district by the Surfside condominiums. The Surfside condominiums were in South Florida, so if you guys have been in Florida for the past year or so, you may have heard about that disaster. And while businesses in that area may not have been physically affected, the streets and the businesses surrounding the disaster zone were shut down for periods of time. This time was critical for the businesses that were not able to be open for their customers as usual. How long can you go without making a sale or receiving goods? Where do you think those customers went for their usual business needs? If they weren't able to get to the places they were used to going, and they still had those needs, they had to go somewhere. I also want you to consider the impact a cyber attack may have on your business. Do you conduct regular updates on your computers and software? Are you aware of phishing and malware scams that can come through any electronic device? Let's go a step further and talk about, what does your business rely on? Do you rely on being connected to the power? You know, do you have lights on? Do you need internet? What if construction down the street cuts an electricity or cable line? That may not be a federal disaster, but it could certainly shut you down for 24 or 48 hours. While this doesn't really sound like a big deal to some, imagine this situation. A dental office that uses cloud program to analyze their x-rays. The office suddenly goes down when they lose internet. Any client, and let's imagine that this dental office uses their phone lines and their cable lines as VoIP. So their voice over IP, their phones run off their internet, and their x-rays run off their internet. And now any clients who need x-rays are unable to be seen. Any phone calls they may need to make that, you know, to cancel any future appointments are unable to be done. They're not receiving any calls coming in to hear of any cancellations or to, you know, get any new appointments. How many appointments did they have to reschedule for clients that were in the office? How long were they out before that cable could be cut? And let's talk about the employees. Did they have a plan prepared for how they were going to react to this very simple, not federal disaster, but just it was a disaster for their business? Did they have a plan set up for their employees to react to this? So let's talk about why business continuity is important. I already touched on this a little, but I want you to also consider why this could be good for your business. Having a plan in place helps your business continue to be a source for your customers. It becomes a competitive advantage. Maybe not when you advertise, but the faster you are back up and running, the more opportunities you can meet that your competitors cannot. We all know the saying, time is money. So the less time you're down, the more likely you are to make more money. Finally, let's talk about the who. We've already done when, why, where. Let's talk about who. Who will this affect? This probably will affect your profit and production, but above all, it affects you and your people, not just their work lives. Consider their personal lives as well. How can they be able to focus on work if they are worried about home, relatives, they've lost their roof, or they have elderly parents that they take care of, or they have their child care facility in the area was, was affected more so than your business. And now they are out of child care, or they have pets that they have to take care of. And, what if they lost the roof and they have pets? What are they going to do? This could be an opportunity for you to involve your employees with the planning stages in your business. And it could go so far as you helping them plan for their own personal situations, which of course will depend on your company culture. You can't mandate that they make a plan, but you can provide resources for helping them do so. So going through this as a team will not only help you and your business recover faster after disaster, it will help them plan for their personal lives as well. All of this to say, can your business survive the disaster? You don't know what's coming, but you can plan for it. Resiliency involves risk management, something as simple as a lighted stairway or as complicated as where to put your propane tanks before a disaster. Contingency planning. So the what if the building you are in is shut off from your customers because of a local disaster? It's now unsafe to shop in your store until the area is cleared. How will you conduct business at that time? Is your backup plan your online store? Are you prepared to communicate with your customers that while you may not be available in person because of the situation, you're still able to maybe do something and provide their needs in a different way? Disaster planning also includes planning for what you need to do first after disaster. What's more important, your delivery vehicle or your store? It will depend on who you are. And I know this is not something that very many people like to talk about because you're in business and you're in the business you enjoy and you've created a business around your skills. But what if something happens to you? What happens to your business, your customers, and your employees? Succession planning is a very important part of business. Some consultants even want you to consider that before you even start your business, because knowing where you're going and how to get there is an important goal-making process of the whole running a business. Now, before we move on to the next slide, I really want you to get ready for this because you'll need to do it. You need to write it down. If you don't write it down and you're doing all this planning and you really believe that you can remember all of this, I would discourage you from getting onto that track. Emergencies are never a time you want to rely on your memory. You need to write it down. You need to write down all the information as you go through these phases, and your plan will start to form itself. I'm going to bring this with these next steps with you into phases because each step kind of builds on the next. Each section can be as detailed as you need it to be. There are some really in-depth resources you can find through a simple online search. I've also provided you some websites at the end of the presentation. And if you download this handout, you'll have them in a PDF form and they should be clickable. I'm going to use a word here that I want you to pay attention to. It's very likely you will not be able to prevent a disaster from affecting you, but you can take steps to mitigate the risk. Mitigate is a very common word in continuity planning. The word you can most use to replicate it is reduce, but I want you to understand that mitigate does not mean that you're going to eliminate, solve, or prevent or remove this issue. A really simple example of it is a surge protector for your expensive electronics. Does it eliminate the risk of harm to your device? Definitely not. But it means there is a level of protection in place that wasn't there before. You know your business better than anyone. So I want you to take a look at this screen and ask yourself these questions. And these are not the full breadth of questions you will be asking yourself, but it's a really great place to get started. what is the likelihood that something's going to happen? We're just going to go over a simple example. Is your computer by a window or on the floor? To mitigate the risk of something happened to it, can you place it on your desk, move it away from the window, or raise it to minimize the potential of flooding or a spill? It could be something that simple, maybe something a little more complicated. Are all of your financial documents on one computer? Let's say you have an in-house accountant. Is that the only place your financial documents and financial system is? Can you investigate a secure cloud storage? That would be an example of mitigating your risk. Now, when you go through this risk assessment, I want you to consider the likelihood of it happening. Rare will be highly unlikely. It may occur under very exceptional circumstances. Let's consider this less than once every 10 years. When you go to unlikely, it's not really expected. It could occur, and there have been no recent incidents, and it has little means of occurring. Let's consider this once every 2 years. When you get to possible, we'll consider this less than twice per year. We're into maybe it occur at some time, but it's infrequent, and it has some reason that it could occur. And if it does, it could be annual likelihood, but it would probably be less than twice a year. We're going to get into the more frequent likely. This will probably happen. This has a history of regular occurrence, and it's not something you can really avoid, but you can take steps to prepare for it happening at a considerable means of occurring 2 to 5 times per year. If you're in a flood zone and it rains, hello, 3 p.m. Florida, is the location you're in likely to occur? This is, the next one is almost certain. This is very likely. The event is expected to occur, and there is a history of regular occurrence, more than 5 times per year. You know, I'm a Floridian, so I'm going to give you another water example. But if you are on the water and that's your business, maybe you're a fisher or you do tours or you're an airboat rider, it's going to rain. You never quite know how bad it's going to get. You know, the weather in Florida, you know it's going to happen, and the weatherman says it's going to be severe, but it could be light in your area, not severe, but it's almost certain to happen. Are you prepared to take steps for that disaster outing? After we've done all of that, we've considered our risks, let's make a list of business functions. This is the who, what, where, and how. We're evaluating, is it critical, is it important, or is it non-emergency? Now, I know we had this saying during the pandemic of non-necessary employees, and employees were feeling kind of like, I know I'm not needed to be there in an emergency, but I do play a necessary function in helping this business run. So I want you to maybe try and rethink about those employees. They're non-emergency personnel. How long can you withstand an interruption to critical functions? So this is where you're going to make a list of your critical functions. You'll then work out the rest, but you really need to work with other people on this, because even if you're just a solo entrepreneur, bring in a friend, a relative, a consultant, discuss the kinds of things that you do on a daily basis that are critical to your business. Discuss the things that you rely on to get that business done. Discuss why you rely on them, and then figure out what is the supporting resource or backup function should something happen to that resource. After you do that, I want you to identify and prioritize hazards. Identify what hazards can affect your business. How severely will that hazard affect your business? We live in Florida. The easiest hazard to think of is a hurricane. but I want you to go beyond weather. And I know I've already discussed this because this is something I really want to make sure you guys understand. This is beyond weather. This is beyond the federal government. This is your day-to-day business lives. Are the power lines for your business above ground, surrounded by overgrown trees? I want you to add notes of things that you need to research or things that you know about the situation. Whose responsibility is it to trim those trees? Is it the power companies, or is it the states, or is it the cities? You should know who you need to contact to get that kind of work done. Is your business next to water? How likely are you to be flooded in the 3 p.m. shower storm? Are there actions you can take to mitigate these risks? This is where you would put it all together. Again, write it down, make your list, decide how likely it is, and how severely it can impact your business. So we're going to take it to the next step, because a lot of people, when they're doing this for the business, if you're going to get really into it, you may not consider other businesses. You probably rely on someone or another business to conduct your business. If your supplier is local and is affected by the same disaster, if not worse than you, do you have a secondary supplier you can call up to start placing backup orders? Maybe you have a good relationship with a competitor that's not local to you that can help ship items that you usually supply to your customers while you cannot. They may even be willing to ship it in your name. Start to think about the way that you rely on other businesses or other ways to continue to get business done when you can't. This is kind of a passion for me, the subject of insurance, and we don't have a lot of time to really go deep into this, and I don't really want to read this slide off to you. Again, you have it in your PDF, but you may want to consider business insurance, and that your insurance that you have now may not cover disasters. Check your policy to know what is covered so you can assess your risk. Do you have a trusted insurance agent you can speak to about all of this? Now, some of these plans can get quite expensive, so you really need to evaluate whether or not it's, you've already made your list of risk assessments and priorities, and that will help you determine whether or not what plans are necessary and what plans are not. So if you don't already know, business interruption insurance is a thing. So if your business is interrupted by, let's say, COVID, you may have insurance that will cover you and your business's expenses, your business's loss of profit through that time. There was a little bit of an issue for some insurance companies that decided they were going to classify it as an act of God, and some insurance policies do not cover that. So, or a natural disaster. But I want you to really think about, does my company need this kind of backup? And if so, how much am I willing to pay to make sure I have it? And you will already have done that research by now to determine the likelihood and how critical that business function is. Phase 2, we're going to take all of the research we've done, all the identifying we've done, and we're going to make a plan. It's time to take that information and plan a way for your business to survive. This plan should be evaluated annually at a very minimum, and it will be as extensive or as simple as you need it to be. Now, when you're evaluating it annually, you may have come up with things over the last year that you didn't really think of the first time. So again, it's good to write it all down and evaluate it minimum annually. We're going to discuss a few different plans to consider, but there will be one in here, and I'll make mention when we get to it. I don't have a lot of really time to spend on it. It's a very simple part of the process, but it will be the most important thing you need to do, hands down. We're going to start with a business impact analysis. The example provided is a simplified version of a possible plan. In more extensive plans can include timelines for each step in the recovery process. This task is daunting, but most of your work has already been created from previous impact analysis. Do what you can and expect yourself to change it and add to the plan each year to improve it. You will need to go through this plan annually, especially because there may be things that you no longer do or no longer have that piece of equipment that was causing the issue. So this is something you should review, put it all together, and plan out. This plan needs to be simple, your emergency response plan. These are the instructions for you and your employees to follow when a disaster strikes. Should a fire happen in your building, somebody needs to be able to grab this folder or grab this piece of paper, and there needs to be steps a designated person needs to take to go through and make sure we get through the very beginning of this disaster. Who's responsible for updating the emergency list? When was it last updated? This binder, this one pager, depending on how big your business is or how in depth you want to make this plan, it should be accessible. Everyone should know where it is. Everyone should know their responsibility within it, and it should lay out who does what and when. I just mentioned the emergency contact list, but that can also be included in your emergency communication plan. Who is responsible for calling employees when the office is shut down if the employee isn't there when the fire happens? Whose responsibility is it to let everyone know what the damages are? Who is responsible for calling your shipping carriers to say, hey, there's no longer a plate, we're no longer here today because there was a fire in our building. Can you, what are the alternate arrangements that your shipping carrier will need to take to get you the goods? Think beyond your employees, beyond your carriers, your partners, your suppliers, and the community that could be counting on you. All of this is very obviously dependent on what kind of business you have, but it's definitely something you should write down. There must be a person responsible for these things, notes to help them communicate things, and it could go as far into depth as communication plan should you have a news outlet come to talk to you. How are you going to communicate, the disaster to them? Now, we are here. This is the single most important thing anybody needs to do. If you're going to write something down, if you're going to do anything I say in this presentation, this is it. You need a ready box. When a disaster strikes, the businesses who have prepared this information are the businesses who receive aid first. The SBA or any other aid organization will not need to wait for you to find this information during an emergency when you're already dealing with so much else, because you've already prepared it ahead of time. The amount of time I spend on this slide definitely doesn't represent the importance of it. It's a simple mini online list, have slightly different, but imagine all the things you will need to make getting help or getting back to production that much faster. Every SBDC disaster consultant I have ever spoken with has told me that this is the single most important thing every client should keep up to date. To consider adding to your ready box, here's a list of some things that aid agencies have needed information to process aid requests. You want to be the one that already has all this information ready to process your aid faster. Because if you're reliant on your accountant and your accountant's going through the same emergency you are, it's just everything will slow down the process. And if you have all this information ready, everything just goes faster. So this is the last plan I want you to think about. We've already identified, all of the information from the identity phase. We spoke about the business impact analysis, writing about how your business will be impacted and setting up factors to reduce the risk. We touched on how your business will respond to an emergency through an emergency response plan, and in a similar way, how your business will communicate with internal and external agencies through the business communications plan, and the big necessary, that ready box. All businesses should keep at a minimum. Let's put it all together and finish it with our business resiliency plan. The resiliency plan is meant to smooth out the negative impacts of disruption on a business function following a disaster, as you identified in your business impact analysis. How long and what actions will it take to get your business back in business? Really simple table of contents of the business resiliency plan. I wanted to make this simple again because we do have a lot of information and it could get more complicated. It could actually be more simple than this, but here are some things to consider adding to your business resiliency plan. Now let's implement it. We are wrapping up this presentation, and I promise the next two phases are not going to take nearly as long as the first two. So let's take action on all the information you've gathered and organized. It's time to implement, but how can we implement a plan for a disaster? We can't fake a disaster. Well, it's time we practice. Sorry about that, guys. You've done all the hard work. Sorry about that. Start with those actions you can take to mitigate the issues you figured out in your identifying and planning stages. Practice, train yourself, your employees on how to respond to a disaster. Test the plan out by going through the process. You may identify why what you plan won't work for you. You would rather find that out without the disaster actually being there. If you're going through it during a disaster and things aren't working as you planned, it's going to cause more panic. You might even discover efficiencies that can make improvements to your plan. You need to do this regularly. Try to do it quarterly, but at least try to do it annually. Make a plan, stick to it, review your plans, and write down your discoveries to make sure there isn't a new aspect of your business that you didn't have in the previous plan. Oh, sorry about that. Phase 4 is recovery. A disaster has occurred. Will your business survive? So now that you've gone through all of that, you're at the end. The disaster has happened. You have the plan laid out. Maybe it doesn't go according to plan, but you've done all the work to think about it all. And you're more likely to survive now. We only have a few more minutes left of our presentation, so this is the very end of it. Let's get to the questions, if there are any.
No questions so far.
That's all right. I know I went through a lot, and if you haven't done disaster planning before, it can kind of be overwhelming. The things we went through during this hour are definitely new to most businesses if they've never done it before. So you probably won't have very many questions until you start getting into it. And I hope I've made this simple enough to follow. The resources at the very end of this presentation, and I'm going to toggle to that. So these are resources that can help you move through the plan. There's the disaster mobile app that our SBDC in South Florida worked closely with FIU and USAID to pull together. We have pretty awesome resources. The Florida SBDC guides and plan examples can be found at our floridasbdc.org preparedness website. FloridaDisaster.org has some really great processes and things, things to consider. FloridaDisaster.biz is often a place that most people will need to go to once a disaster occurs or if a disaster is imminent. Ready.gov/business is a great resource for businesses, but for your personal life, ready.gov is a great resource for being ready for any kind of disaster, any kind of continuity, personal or private, or personal or business. The SBA even has business guides to manage your business and prepare for emergencies. I've given you guys a lot of resources, probably a lot to think about. There might not be questions now, and that's totally okay.
I have a question. Can disaster planning be expensive?
It doesn't have to be. If you are a large business, I do recommend investing what you need to get a continuity professional in your business and help you go through this process. They've done it before and they can really give you some in-depth knowledge of things you may not consider. And they may even give you some ideas of mitigations that you can add to your plan to mitigate the risk of what's going on. I do recommend that for larger companies. If you're a smaller company, it's going to be a lot easier. I know this sounds very complicated, but if you start from the beginning and just start writing it down, you're going to practically have it done by the time you get to the end of, midway, by your time you get your ready box together. Most of the information you will need will be there. I mean, if that's the only thing you do, you will be much more prepared than most of the other businesses surrounding you.
Another question. In your opinion, would it make sense to include some type of disaster planning language into your business plan?
I guess it would depend on what you are making the plan for. A lot of banks do want a very simple plan, and maybe having it as an appendix or mentioning it as an appendix might be a good idea, especially if you're, depending on what kind of, what is the purpose of your business plan and what's changing about it. It probably, those 4 different plans should probably be separate documents in their own right, but adding it to your business plan might be making it too complicated, but maybe should be mentioned.
Would it make sense for those who are looking for like business loans or other funding?
I think it would be a really great idea, in my opinion. I would not, again, add it to the plan itself, but maybe add it to an addendum to the plan, or mention the steps you've taken to make sure that your business plan or that your disaster plan is as up to date as possible. Again, I think it should be a separate document entirely, but mentioning it in there or adding parts and pieces will show, the person you're going to ask for a loan that you've thought about it. What happens if a disaster happens? How am I going to continue to make money to pay your loan back?
And as far as the business planning process, or sorry, not business planning, disaster planning process, who in the organization should be involved? Should it be just the owners? Should it be higher level management? Who should be involved in the disaster planning process?
That's a really great question. It should, in my opinion, it should start with the owner, because if you do not have it as a mindset priority in your organization, then it's not really going to be a priority for you to allow your employees to take the time to do this process. It should start at the top, and depending on how wide your organization spreads, that will depend on how many people need to be involved. It should definitely start at the C-suite and be a separate organization within your organization if possible. Somebody needs to be responsible for this plan. Somebody needs to be responsible for making sure it's updated, making sure that the trainings happen, continuing to be on the lookout for options to mitigate risk, continuing to have the conversations with your production team to know if there's any new equipment that's maybe safer, better, cheaper to install. They need to be part of the process. They don't need to be in all of your business decision making, but if there's any way you can designate a person to be responsible for it, they should, and they should have access to the people that make decisions throughout your organization.
And how often should you update your disaster plan?
I would make it a priority to update it as often, like keep it in your head that if you get a new product line, it should be part of that process. It should be part of that new plant opening. It should be part of that reconstruction activity. But if that's not something your organization can add to its functions, it needs to be done at minimum annually. You need to review everything that's happened this past year, take out any of the mess that is no longer in your business, and pull in any of the things that might be new to your business. At the very minimum annually, if you can do it quarterly, that would be awesome.
And how do I get started with the SBDC with my disaster planning?
So I think it should be part of your business planning period. You should have these conversations when you're talking about your financials with, your accountant. If you're talking to somebody within the Florida SBDC and you're having these conversations, at the end of the meeting or close to the end of the meeting, think about, okay, everything we talked about, how am I going to handle that should a disaster come? What kind of priority is it? Is this particular step when a disaster comes around? Definitely keep it in the conversation, depending on what your need is.
Great. I don't see any more questions here. Any final comments, Dr. Teresa?
Nope. I'm giving you guys my email address, and here's the information for our website and the phone number to reach our Orlando office. As Hira said, we are throughout the Central Florida counties, and if you are not even in Central Florida, we'll be able to help you find the resource that's closest to you. If you want to meet with one of our consultants, go ahead and fill out our request for consulting form. And if you already work with the SBDC, schedule your appointment with your business consultant to discuss, your business and how it can react to a disaster.
All right, great. Thank you again, Teresa, for presenting on disaster planning. I think it's very important for every business to understand what the contingency plans are, what to do next if something were to happen, if a business interruption does happen. Thank you again. For those who attended, thank you so much for attending this webinar. We hope to see you again. Again, reminder, you should get an evaluation about this webinar later today. Please fill that out. We use that information to plan for future events and to assess what we can do to further help small businesses. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure being here, and thank you for sticking with us.